Hey, it's Sunday on the Breakfast Club, and I am Serious Mind. I'm probably going to mirror this video on my personal channel because there's some personal things in this that I think belong there as well. So here goes. The last couple years, well, really for over 10 years, but especially the last 2 or 3 years, I've been working on my genealogy and also my wife's genealogy. And it's been pretty fun. I've been able to go back pretty far. Like on my side, for me, I've been able to go back 4 generations complete. So I've been able to get my parents, my grandparents, all my great grandparents, and all my great great grandparents. I know all of them. Uh, and then in some of them, I was able to go back even further. One I went back really far, like 1,000 years, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But it's neat because there's a lot of detective work involved. You know, when you're looking at these documents, sometimes, especially if names are common names, you have to make some assumptions, and a lot of those assumptions turn out to be wrong. And you'll find out some better documentation that's a little more clear, a little more obviously connected to your ancestor, and then that'll refute some other things, and you'll see some incongruities that you realize that okay, this document I thought was related can't be, and you have to flush it out and kind of readjust. And and it's been neat. So we've done a bit of traveling. You know, again, we've also done my wife's, and with her, we were able to go back 3 generations complete, and then some much further back. And one line we got back about 400 years or so, 450 years. So that was pretty cool. And it's kind of wild because you find out because I think growing up we all hear stories from our parents, our grandparents if they're still alive, and in rare cases where our great grandparents were alive when we were young, we might have heard something else. And it's interesting finding like the family stories that turn out to be true or at least partially true, and some turn out to be complete fabrications. One that I thought was kind of interesting is 202, I guess. My wife, her father had told her that his grandfather had died in a rail accident, and in fact, I did find documentation to prove that. In fact, I found a reference to a court case where his widow sued the company he worked for wrongful death. But back in the days before worker safety laws, the courts were not inclined to rule in your favor, so she lost. And then, ironically, they used that case as precedence against another widow, who also got screwed out of getting any compensation for a dead husband. And then there are other ones that are like partially true. Her mother told her that her mother's grandfather was a sea captain, and he went down with the ship, and then he had worked for the White Star Line. And turns out, well, he was a sea captain. He did work for White Star, not in the passenger liners though, on cargo ships. But he didn't go down with the ship. He died of natural causes in 1898. What I did find out though is that his wife's brother drowned. He was a sailor as well. So, whether or not that was a deliberate lie, or to make it sound more exciting, or if these were accidentally conflated, because the years distant, because my wife's mother didn't know either of her grandparents. And then the ones that are just completely fabricated, like her mother had told her that her mother had told, was that they were English, but turns out that wasn't true at all. My wife's grandmother, her parents one was from Scotland and the other was Irish, born in Canada, and her father and mother were born in Ireland. So, what's interesting is that we also did the ancestry DNA, and people have asked me, does the DNA work? And it absolutely does. We've actually matched to living people, and we've been able to cross-match with the documentary evidence to show that, so that we basically confirm the documentation with the DNA and vice versa. So that was really cool, and we've actually talked to and met some of these people. So we recently actually met a relative of a cousin of my wife who is descended from her great grandmother and great grandfather I just mentioned, the sailor. So now that woman is a generation later, but she's only 5 years younger because my wife is descended from the youngest child, and the other woman is descended from like the second oldest child. So there's like 14 years apart between the siblings. So there's only 5 years between my wife and her cousin. And what's interesting is finding out that story about them being English. She heard the same thing from her grandmother. So my wife's cousin's grandmother and my wife's mother were first cousins and probably knew each other, and so they had heard the same lie growing up, and so we've kind of hazarded a guess as to why they lied, but it's interesting, to hear the same lie was told, the same family story, made up story was told. All around. But the documentation absolutely refutes that. And in fact, we were able to go back to Ireland, and my wife last year visited Ireland and was actually able to find even more information going back several generations and see some of the ancestral locations. And so that was pretty cool. It was really neat stuff. And myself, I was able to, obviously being of mixed heritage, and being part black, so eventually you go back and you hit the wall of slavery. But I was actually able to not only figure out the slave owning family that owned my father's 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 father, William, but also figure out through the DNA matches that we're descended from the slave family that owned us. So we know what was going on in that farm. That was kind of interesting as well. And the thing about it, though, it's more than just seeing names and dates, because when you start going through the documentation, it does two things. One, you kind of see, the whole history of what it took for you to be you, and how unlikely that was, because, your mother and your father had to get together at a particular time, and they had to conceive you. There's only 1 month that could have happened, because otherwise you would have been a different ova, and so if they had a child, it wouldn't be you. It would be definitely a different ova, and it would probably be a different sperm, because sperm don't live that long. So you wouldn't have happened. And so how they got together, how they happened to be in the places they were for you to be who you are, is kind of amazing. I went back several generations, first through Ireland, which I knew, and then surprisingly to England, which I didn't know. And as it turns out, we haven't confirmed it yet, but there's a pretty decent chance I'm actually related to DeLand Cole, which is pretty cool. And my wife actually might be related to Paul from Got That Funk, from this channel. So that's really neat, and because I love those guys, and to find out that you were probably related is pretty cool. But looking back in the English line, there was a man who he married a woman, and then she died after having a couple kids, and then he married her sister, it turns out, and then she had a couple kids and she died, and then he married a third woman, and I'm descended from a child that he had with the third woman. So 2 women had to die. If neither one of them died, then my ancestor doesn't get born. I'm not here. So it's really kind of wild, seeing this and seeing the whole chain of events that had to happen. We talk about, improbabilities, and especially when we argue with creationists, it's like, hey, there's a huge improbability right there, and this is just naturally occurring. It's pretty neat. But the other part, and I think the most important part of all of this, is that you do feel, in some cases when you can find a lot of information, you do feel a connection to people, and I think that's probably the most rewarding part. When I mentioned my wife's great grandmother, finding out that her husband was at sea and away a lot, and we thought 6 children, it turned out 9, and 3 children didn't make it past 10. One died at 10 or like 9, and one died at 6, and the other died at a year and a half. And because the husband was away a lot, the good chance, that those children died when he was away at sea. So thinking about what she had to go through, and then, as I said earlier, her brother drowned at sea. So, thinking about everything she went through, and as my wife was going through the documentation in Nova Scotia, and all the children dying of preventable diseases, and so she really hates anti-vaxxers even more than she did before. When she's just seen whole families wiped out by preventable diseases. And it starts to make you connected to these people, So they're not just names, and they're not just dates. They're people, and there was a story, and they did things, and while we'll never totally get all of it, the fact that you could get some of it, and as particularly for the generations that are just past the ones where maybe if your grandparents, or you didn't know your great grandparents. But if you can find out a little about them, and you kind of feel a little connected, and it certainly, if your grandparents, if you knew them, helps you understand them a little better if you know what they went through. Like my wife's grandfather, one of her grandfathers, it turns out, when his father, the guy who died in the rail yard accident, his mother, got destitute for a while, and actually put them up into an orphanage, and she never knew about that. So now it helps her understand her grandfather just a little bit better as to why he was the way he was, and maybe why he didn't talk much about things, from his younger days, because maybe it was a bit painful. Well, we know from the documentation they eventually got back. The family was reunited. But even there, she married again, and then she was on her own, living with the children, and no husband around, and we didn't know if he had died or what. And then we got contacted by somebody who is a relative who said, "Hey, well, your great grandmother's husband that." You don't know where he went. Well, we do. He moved down to South Carolina, and he's my grandfather, and or great grandfather, or something like that. And this person remembers, the two of them had, this person and my wife's step grandfather, step great grandfather had a child, and this person remembers her coming around when they were very young. So. It's kind of interesting, seeing all these connections and filling all these gaps, and again, connecting with people, and there's some people you'll never really be able to connect with, like my ancestry, what we found, and again, there's some assumptions made that we still have to confirm, but it's looking like I'm actually descended from the Plantagenet kings. We're talking William the Conqueror and Edward the First, Henry the Third. King John, the Magna Carta dude, and Edward I is the mean Braveheart king. So, and some other interesting characters. Obviously, that's so far back that it's unlikely. I mean, there's probably, if there's any alleles left that have come from them specifically, it's unlikely. There's going to be scant, and it's way too far back to really feel a connection to them directly. But it is interesting, to know you're descended from some interesting people in history, and I think we probably all are. But what ended up happening, though, recently, after doing all this and really, really kind of feeling satisfied and excited about it, and then it's something that occurred to me, because I don't have children of my own. I said to my wife that, hey, she's got grandchildren, and I was thinking, well, not only is this for you and your kids, but your grandkids, and if they have kids, this is helping them, because it's, they're going to, stack on, and it helps them know where they came from. And it occurred to me, because we've gone out to cemeteries too, and even as an atheist, I don't believe in an afterlife. And I certainly don't think that our bodies, after we die, hold any special reverence, that there's anything there. But I don't know, there's something I think about being in the cemetery and trying to connect. If you remember, if you've seen the movie Star Trek First Contact, there's a scene where Captain Picard touches, the very first warp ship, and Data asks him what he's doing, and he says, touching that tactile sensation to something, makes it feel more real. There's just something about it, and I think it's very human, and it makes you really understand religion a little better. Even though I don't follow any religion and I don't believe in any gods, it kind of helps you put things in perspective as to why we have them. Even though they tend, I think they're probably more trouble than they're worth. But so in discussing this, we went to actually find one of her great grandmothers. We found out where she was buried, but we couldn't find a headstone, and I was thinking about that, and then it occurred to me that I don't have children of my own, and it struck me that because of this, that while somebody may come across me in their own documentation search, I have a ton of half brothers and sisters. But because I don't have any children, no one's going to be coming across looking for me. I'll just be, incidental. And I have to say, I guess maybe because I don't believe in an afterlife, that filled me with a sense of profound sadness for a little while. The fact that, once I die and the people that know me and care about me die, there's really not going to ever be anyone who notices or cares that I was here. And that made me sad. It really did. And it made me understand people who really feel driven to have kids, and who, as opposed to adopting or whatever, or not having kids. I could really see it. And I know I have some friends who would definitely say there's something selfish about it. And I think that's probably true. But, there's not going to be, 100 years from now, no one's going to be looking me up. Because, chances are, I'm not famous, and I'm probably not going to be famous. It's not, it's not impossible that I could come up with something in engineering that might live past me and have my name on it. But it's not likely at this point. I am 48 after all. And that made me sad. But it made me think, it's all the more reason to try to build a legacy. And that legacy is probably not going to have my name on it, but at least if in some way I can make a difference, that outlives me, that'd be a really good thing. Again, even if my name's not assigned to it, it'd be nice if it was, but even if it's not, to know that I left something behind that can help people, go on, and whether it's, convincing people to make some good choices politically, so the world is better, even that's something. And so it made me kind of, I haven't really done much with my channel and in a long time, but it made me think, for whatever little tiny part that I can do, to kind of push that large boulder, even if it's just a few millimeters, it's probably worth giving it a try again, just to see what I can do. That's all you can do, is try. So anyway, on that note, you have a good week. Got That Funk should be up tomorrow, I think, or maybe Sister Danger, not really sure. But anyway, whoever's up next, I'm sure will be great, and look forward to what they have to say. Catch you next time.